13,000 dead, the vast majority of them women and children, in just 40 days. 60 journalists slain, though scarcely a journalist in the Western world has even commented upon it. More than 50,000 wounded, the vast majority of them women and children. Thousands still buried under the rubble. If you are still supporting this, you are a psychopath who should not be walking among us. And that includes the vast majority of politicians in the parliaments and assemblies of the Western world. And Joe Biden has a bad trip in San Francisco. It can happen, apparently. He goes gaga on camera, calls his guest a dictator, and thinks that's going to improve relations between the United States and China. And Russia has a massive economic surplus after a total economic war has been waged against them for a year and a half. By comparison, our economies are doing, well, meh. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
After occupying the Al-Shifa hospital for almost a week, Israel declares that it has found a 55-meter tunnel. They didn't have time to dig anymore, and the concrete will have to dry before the media can be allowed to inspect it. 55 meters isn't much of a tunnel. Do the maths. I'm not sure where that tunnel would take you. It is, of course, a huge hoax. The entire Al-Shifa hospital story, vouched for by Joe Biden, making him jointly and severally responsible for the massacre of the Al-Shifa hospital that will go down in history like the extermination of the Warsaw Ghetto itself. It was a casus belli announced from the beginning. They said that the Hamas leadership was inside the Al-Shifa hospital, though no trace of any of them has been found. They said the armed men were running the hospital, though no armed men existed. Only dead bodies of men, women, and children, doctors, nurses, and technicians. It is a war crime of unimaginable proportions. And yet the Western politicians continued to support it until the last drop of blood was shed on the floor of the wards, of the clinics, of the children's wards of the Al-Shifa hospital. No one will ever forget this crime. No one who supported it will ever be allowed to forget it either. And in any case, they've moved on. Their Sheikh Radwan hospital children's ward, the pediatric ward, was bombed today. Maybe the Hamas leaders in their 55-meter tunnel, still wet, the concrete still glistening. Maybe they escaped to Sheikh Radwan. Maybe they escaped to the Indonesia hospital. Maybe they escaped to the Sheikh Zayed hospital. Why not? They bombed and destroyed virtually every single hospital in the Gaza Strip. In any case, Israel has already announced that the leaders of Hamas are not now in the hospitals. They are in the south of Gaza, in Khan Yunis, the very place that Israel stampeded 1 million people to go and live under the stars as the weather turns filthy, as being safer than being in the north. Well, if the Hamas leaders are now in the south, the same kind of genocidal bombardment visited on the north of the Gaza Strip will now be visited on the south. I want to remind you, because not enough people know this, the Gaza Strip is 25 miles long. It is 3.5 miles wide. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. 1 million people are now homeless. Their houses destroyed. 13,000 people dead. 5,500 of them children. Never voted for anybody in their puff. There hasn't been an election in Gaza since 2006, meaning statistically the vast majority of those murdered in this genocidal rampage have never voted for anybody, even if it was acceptable to murder someone because of how they voted. These media outlets still describing this as the Israel-Hamas war are themselves committing a war crime for which Streicher was executed at the Nuremberg Tribunal for his contribution through Der Stürmer, the Nazi filth rag, in the encouragement of the Holocaust, which massacred 6 million Jews, millions of others, and led to the Second World War, in which nearly 100 million people died. It's a crime. It is a war crime to encourage genocide, even if only with your pen, even if only with your microphone, even if only on your auto cue. It is a crime. And all these people are jointly culpable for it. Everybody now knows that the Hamas headquarters was not in the Al-Shifa hospital, even imagining that they have a headquarters at all. From the guerrilla videos that I have seen, they're giving the invading Israeli forces a bloody good hiding in the alleyways of Gaza. Why would they need a command and control center anywhere, let alone under a hospital, that the director repeatedly begged the United Nations to come and inspect, to prove the lie that somehow Hamas were underneath this hospital? This is not, of course, the only information crime that has been committed. All those, including some very eminent British and American journalists, who purveyed the lie that 50 babies had been beheaded by the Hamas infiltrators into Israel on October 7th, now stand completely shamed forevermore. Only one baby was killed on October the 7th. And who killed that baby is still a moot point, because it is now admitted that which I said at the beginning and was treated to hundreds of threats for doing so. The Israeli armed forces killed a very significant number of the 900 to 1,200 people who died on the 7th of October. I give that range because I'm predicting here now that 900 people died, Israelis, and 300 Palestinians died. That's my best guess on the information we have at this moment. So 900 Israelis, not 1,400 Israelis, not nearly 2,000 Israelis, and not 50 beheaded babies, one dead baby, not beheaded. The Israeli state has accepted that it has no evidence of anybody being raped on October the 7th. The Israeli state, the police no less, have admitted today that Israeli Apache helicopters shelled and rocketed the Trans Music Festival, and conceded that the Hamas and other resistance organizations who invaded on that day their ancient homeland had no idea of any festival going on in the shadow of the suffering and misery of Gaza. All those cars that we were treated to endlessly on our mass media, burned husks with burned people inside them, were turned into burned husks by Apache helicopters flown by Israeli pilots who recklessly as ever simply killed anything that moved or might look like it had moved. The concentration camp breakout on October the 7th was bloody, to be sure. Any concentration camp breakout was bound to be bloody. The people ultimately responsible are the people who kept the keys to the concentration camp decade after decade after decade. The people revolted because they could not breathe. Shifa Hospital was a lie. The beheaded babies was a lie, but some things are indisputably true. One of them is that 60 Palestinian and other national journalists have been systematically murdered in 40 days. 60 in 40 days. Now you may think that dropping 2,000-pound bombs in refugee camps and on schools, 500 died yesterday in a United Nations school. 500, most of them children and women, in a school, in an instant, were incinerated yesterday. None of them were Hamas. None of them was targeted specifically. It was just a very big bomb dropped on a defenseless school building. You may say that that's why these journalists were killed, but I beg to differ. There's a systematic attempt being made to assassinate every journalist, every photojournalist, everyone responsible for bringing us the images that have changed all of our lives forever. Well, I can only speak for myself. I cannot look at a child now without imagining the children that I've just been looking at, torn limb from limb, their heads excavated of their contents, their limbs literally coming apart at the touch. I am unable to live and function normally now, and maybe forevermore, as a result of what I have seen. So I have another conclusion here. Either the people responsible for Western support for this genocide are not watching these videos, in which case they are miserable, gutless cowards, or they are watching them and pressing on regardless, in which case they are demonic, satanic demons that should not be at large, never mind at large and running our affairs. The Arab states are headed for China. They are going to China first to try and bring about an end to this genocidal madness, which can only end in the consuming of all of us physically and psychologically and economically, can only lead to the overthrow of regimes in the Arab and Muslim world thought by their people to be in any way complicit, even collaborating with this slaughter of the innocent. So the kings and the emirs are scurrying to China first, not Washington, not London, not Paris, but China. And they're right to do so. China must step up to its responsibility as the second greatest power in the world and try to end this helter-skelter, which may in the end consume us all. And I believe that the Chinese leader in San Francisco this week showed the kind of poise and sagacity that renders him more than capable of stepping up to the mark. He arrived for the APEC conference, San Francisco 2023, if he'll forgive me, like a visiting king, regal, poised, sophisticated, calm, collected. And my goodness, his interlocutor stooped to the occasion. Joe Biden turned left when he should have turned right, stood up when he should have sat down, left when he should have stayed, stayed when he should have left, looked like a demented old fool, jumped up out of his seat unannounced and went staggering round to Xi Jinping and started talking to him in English with no translator present. I tell you, this man is unhinged, and he's in charge of your world, my world. It's the Chinese tradition to be, well, more than generous in their respect of elderly people. But it was tough with Joe Biden, who looked for all the world like Chance the Gardener in Peter Sellers' last and greatest film, Being There. That was Joe Biden, just being there. The icing on the cake has to be the describing of his guest in his presence as a dictator, after having struggled at great expense and effort to try and repair his relations with China. In their interest, the interests of the American plutocrats who were queuing up to meet Xi Jinping. The interest of the world that requires not another global war over Taiwan. The interests of the ASEAN region filled with American allies who would be the first casualties of the conflict between America and China going hot, going nuclear. After having done all that, Joe Biden described the Chinese president as a dictator in his presence. And they imagine that anything will ever be the same again. The Russian economy is booming. It's official. Russia has turned in an $87 billion budget surplus. Its economy is booming. Local industries have taken over the markets, even the premises, sometimes with a little artistic shift, even the logos of the Western countries that marched out of Russia under Joe Biden's orders a year and a half ago. The Russian economy is booming. The Western economy is sinking. In Britain, everybody here from Britain and this audience knows exactly what I'm talking about. Britain is about to become a freezing hellhole of poverty, of unemployment, of social, cultural, religious, and political strife. We have a government of Rishi Sunaks and Suella Bravermans and all the other motley crew. My goodness, aren't they the answer to the identitarian politicians? If only we had more black people in office. If only we had more women in office. We've got a cabinet chock full of black and Asian people, many of them women, and it is the worst, most incompetent, most venal cabinet that I can remember in my long political life. But in Germany, you would not believe the state of affairs in Germany. I've got a couple of videos to show you that I hope help to bring what's happening in Germany under your attention. You know, you go to prison for saying stop the genocide in Germany today. You know that having a Palestinian flag on a demonstration is a crime in Germany. And here's the pièce de résistance. If the Germans who invaded France 3 times in 70 years will forgive my French, new citizens in Germany will have to sign an oath of allegiance to the Reich. Not the German Reich, the Israeli Reich. Correct me if I'm wrong, but no other country in the entire history of the world has required its citizens to pledge their allegiance not to their own country, but to another country somewhere else. We've got great guests lined up for you tonight. It is the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
Our favorite professor, George Szamuely from Hungary, is here to talk about that and other stories, and I'm very glad to welcome him. George, Dr. George, thank you for joining us. Am I right in that prediction that the war is coming to an end and soon our leaders will be, at least on the face of it, wondering what we're talking about when we raise the issue of the great economic war we in Europe launched against Russia, only to have it turned into a very large boomerang that came back and hit us in the face?
Well, it would be nice to think that you are right. I don't know. The Americans and the NATO gang in Europe will find it very hard to admit defeat. They are going to do their damnedest to continue this war for as long as possible, because as far as they are concerned, this is a good deal for them. It keeps the American military-industrial complex humming. It's relatively low on casualties as far as the United States is concerned. In fact, it has 0 casualties as far as the United States is concerned. And when they look upon this war, they say, well, okay, we've got Ukrainians dying, but they don't care very much about that. We've got Russians dying. That brings them pleasure, as Senator Lindsey Graham said ecstatically. So they will want to keep it going for as long as possible to kill as many Slavs as possible. So that's why the longer this war goes on, then, the fewer Slavs there are to worry about. So I'd like to think that this war is coming to an end, but I wouldn't put it past the Americans just to keep it going for that much longer.
Well, that would require the Ukrainians to keep on fighting and dying, of course. And there are ample signs. Just today, an Air Force commander flew his $100 million fighter jet given by the American taxpayer. He flew it to Russia and surrendered it, and himself. The number of people surrendering on the battlefield is increasing. The inability to replace the fallen with new conscripts is drying up. Anyone with money has already fled Ukraine in order to avoid their military duty, and the inner circle is showing signs of tiring with Zelensky.
That's true. All of that is true. But the extraordinary thing is that Ukraine has kept this war going for as long as it has, because, as you said earlier, there was no way Ukraine could ever win this war. That was just, the numbers never made any sense. I mean, Russia's 4 times the size. Russia, unlike Ukraine, has a military industry. Russia is a strong, self-reliant economy. You would have thought, and I guess this is probably what the Russian leaders were thinking back in February of last year, that Ukraine will realize what a foolish enterprise this is to wage a war that Ukraine cannot win. But for some reason, Ukraine has foolishly continued fighting. So it may well be that Ukraine is on its last legs. At some point, it will have to be on its last legs. But I always want to just be a little bit cautious. They're still able to put some men into the field. So I wouldn't be surprised if it'll go on for at least a little while longer.
George, turning a little, though the same elements are involved, the European Union's leaders, luckily for them, the EU leaders themselves don't have to be elected by anyone. I shudder to think what von der Leyen would poll in a European-wide poll, or even Borrell. They don't have to be elected. They are appointed and give themselves plenipotentiary powers. I mean, von der Leyen, on the face of it, has no say over European Union foreign policy, although she's all the while making it ex cathedra wherever she goes or turns her attention to. But the elected European leaders, I'm in Berlin, Schulz is on 12%. 12. And he's the Chancellor of Germany. His bonkers Baerbock riding partner, the Green leader, is sitting on only a tiny bit more. The British government of Rishi Sunak, I mean, again, it's almost laughable, the parlous state of Western European governments, but they plough on regardless, don't they? In defiance now of their own people, of, for example, a ceasefire in Gaza. Why? How?
It's quite striking. I don't remember any time in recent history when there's been such a disjunction between popular opinion and the opinion of political elites. And that's true in the United States, and it's true in Europe. With both in the United States and in Europe, they want the wars in Ukraine and the war in Gaza to come to an end. There's an overwhelming support for a ceasefire in Gaza. And yet, when it comes to a voting Congress, something like 96, 97% of the members of Congress, and then both the House and the Senate, will vote for no ceasefire. At best, a humanitarian pause, which is a kind of a complete oxymoron. And the same goes in Europe. I mean, you never see any anti-Russian demonstration. You never see a demonstration in favor of Zelensky. The Europeans and the Americans think this is a crazy idea. The war should have come to an end. But that's not the view of von der Leyen. It's not the view of Sergeant Schulz and Baerbock and Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and the rest of the gang. They want to keep the war going. Then you have to think, well, there's something in it for them. There's money, there's prestige, there are all kinds of academic gigs when they leave office, seats on various boards. That's what they care about. And the public says, let's bring both of these wars to an end, and especially in Europe, let's bring these nutty economic sanctions to an end.
Yes, these sanctions are now going to bite us big time over what is expected to be a very cold winter, George. I explained the economic situation in Germany as best I could in a moment. The situation on the street in Germany, it looks really dire, I must tell you. The people are miserable. There's no heating on anywhere, even in department stores it's cold. The people can't afford the vast hike in energy costs that they have suffered as a result of these sanctions and the blowing up of the pipeline. And of course, it was famously said, if Germany catches cold, the rest of the economies in Europe will get influenza or worse. How are we going to cope with this?
Well, we can't. The key to European success since 1945 has been German economic success. Germany used to be very good at fighting wars. It's forgotten how to do that, but it's been very good at creating a very productive economy. The Wirtschaftswunder, that's been its pride and joy. I mean, it's boasted about this for the past near 80 years. That's gone. I mean, with the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, they just don't have any source of cheap energy anymore. If they don't have any source of cheap energy, they're not going to be able to maintain their fantastic industries, all those cars and consumer appliances and pharmaceuticals and chemicals, all the things that gave German industry this enormous global reputation. They're all going to go. So it's not just people are going to be miserable because they don't have any heating in their homes. They're just not going to have a productive economy any longer. And the Americans are very happy. I mean, that's exactly what they wanted. They just want to remove all rivals from the scene. What's baffling about it is why the Germans allowed themselves to be put in this position. I mean, the Germans would surely have understood that this is what the Americans want. The Americans want you out of the way and cease to be a competitor to them. I mean, Trump at least made that explicit. But with Biden, I mean, it's been obvious. I mean, we had that humiliating scene where Sergeant Schultz was standing there next to Biden, and Biden said, "We are going to end the Nord Stream pipelines." And when he was asked, "Well, how are you going to do that?" he said, "Well, don't worry, we're going to do it." And Schultz said nothing, just sat, stood there like a dummy. I mean, can you imagine any German chancellor being humiliated in public like this? He's holding the office that Bismarck held. And or Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt in more recent times. That's Germany today.
Now, turning finally to San Francisco, George, winners, losers, did anything useful come out of it? It was a PR victory for China, but I'm not sure that America's policy has changed towards them.
No, I don't think it has. I think Biden made clear, with his dictator comment, basically, that he's still sticking with his mindless division of the world between democracies and autocracies. He basically, the United States has really very little to contribute to the world. But I agreed with your opening editorial. China has yet to pull its weight in the world. I mean, it's a problem when, Russia is doing all the heavy lifting on many different issues. And China, at best kind of follows along. But, China is a huge economic power. It's obviously an enormous country. It has to, to step up, and it has to provide an alternative model for the rest of the world. You can't just expect always Russia to be in the forefront. So, he comes there and he wants good peace, good relations with the United States. And then, he gets all these the top 400 corporate leaders in the United States who give him a standing ovation. I mean, what do they want? They just simply want to go to China and make a lot of money. It's just a source of cheap labor for them. And, China has to be a little bit more than that. Can't just go on essentially providing, U.S. corporate titans with a source of cheap labor. So, either it's going to be a kind of the pole of a new world order, or it's just going to be an appendage of the United States.
Thank you very much, as always, Dr. George Szamuely from Budapest and the Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute. Always a pleasure and a privilege.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway. Don't
forget to subscribe to the channel and to press the thumbs up to show that you like the show. Not for reasons of vanity, but to influence big algorithm, who's always trying to suppress, distort, and in extremis lock out the voices of the righteous, one of whom is Garland Nixon, who joins us now from the United States. He's been harassed, harried, and cancelled so many times on different branches of social media. I've quite lost track. All I know is I myself am missing his output. And I know from my own social media that many people are also. So Garland Nixon, welcome back to the show. It's, of course, not the most important issue, but just bring us up to date on where your own profile is now. Are you still locked out of Twitter? What can we do to influence it if you are?
No, actually, yes, I still am locked out of my Twitter. Again, Twitter has, the last thing that happened was they instructed me that the account that I've had since 2009, the account that I actually pay for, I paid for an entire year for a verified account. They've instructed me that they cannot verify that I own that account. And so I'm locked out of that account. They've told me that I'm free to open another account, which how would they verify me with the second one? I don't know, but I am getting closer to taking the action necessary to get this situation adjudicated, and I'll just leave it at that.
You don't want us to get involved, but just tell us when you do, and we'll mobilize the masses to bring the case in front of the people who need to know about it. Let's turn first to San Francisco. If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair, as the song went long before you were born. I now realize from the lack of recognition in your eyes at my metaphor, but it is a zany kind of place. And Joe Biden was in particularly zany form. Perhaps it was the haze, the marijuana haze in the city. How do you account for Joe Biden's behavior at the conference?
Well, I mean, certainly, if you look at the conference there, the person that, of all people to really pity, I felt sorry for Anthony Blinken. Certainly, it was very interesting summit in that a number of oligarchs, Tim Cook was there and Elon Musk, and they all gave Xi Jinping a standing ovation, making it clear that a large faction of the ruling elite is making a great profit off of the Chinese market, and they certainly don't screw that up. I think that was extremely important, an important aspect of that conference. But then, of course, needless to say, at some point when a microphone was stuck in front of Joe Biden, he again referred to Xi Jinping as a dictator and made a fool of himself. I think when I look at that, my immediate reaction is the ruling elite are actually mocking us. To put Joe Biden out there and to pretend that he is in charge of anything, that he is making decisions, is a mockery of politics, and it insults our intelligence when we all know better. So it again raises the question that we all ask, who really is calling the shots? Because Joe Biden is clearly confused. It appears that they had discussed the issues with him beforehand, and I suspect that when he got in front of the camera, he just blurted out the first thing that came to his addled brain.
Dazed and confused he may be, but you may well have him for another 5 years, even if he has to be pickled and a stick put up his back to keep him upright. Can the American rulers really be serious about running this man for election again next November?
Well, it is remotely possible, but I don't see how they can do it. We can certainly see that Gavin Newsom is the person who set up this summit. He's the one who went to China and met with Xi Jinping. He's the one who welcomed people when they got there. So certainly there is a move amongst the ruling elite to replace Joe Biden with Gavin Newsom. Certainly Donald Trump is leading by far in the Republican race. And the likelihood is that if he were to go against Joe Biden, again, I can't see how they can. Joe Biden couldn't do a debate against Donald Trump or anyone else, so I don't know how much longer they can hide this thing. But Donald Trump, to me, would certainly be the person who would likely win. The only issue being the ruling elite don't want Donald Trump, and I find it hard to believe that since we have no democracy whatsoever in this country, that the people of the Republican Party who want Donald Trump will be able to have their wishes granted. I just see the ruling elite using all machinations they possibly can to stop Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, you inadvertently, from my point of view, open up, if you like, the big enchilada there, Garland. To what extent is it possible to continue to describe our countries, yours, mine, Germany, perhaps in the front rank, as democracies. I mean, I'm so old, I remember when we endlessly sneered at the rest of the world, who had no free speech, whose police were apolitical, who had a civil service that was neutral, that had a government and an opposition which had opposition views, and a real dichotomy existed. We had a free press, in your case, guaranteed by the Constitution. Now we're overseeing the mass murder of journalists in Gaza. Julian Assange is rotting in a London jail, waiting to rot forever in an American jail. The media is virtually 100% behind the prevailing orthodoxy. No one else can get a look in. If you go on a protest, you're called the enemy within, put on the FBI's watch list, and you might well end up, on a terrorism charge. It's really a parody of democracy that we now, quote unquote, enjoy, isn't it?
Yes, and they've actually turned democracy inside out. If you look at the attack on protesters, recently at the DNC headquarters in Washington, D.C., a group of protesters led by rabbis protested in front of the DNC headquarters. Admittedly, they were mostly Democrats. The DNC headquarters was closed. They sent a bunch of goons out. They beat the devil out of these people. You can go online and find the videos. They just mercilessly beat the protesters, threw some of them downstairs. So not only do we not have a democracy, our government is at war with its constituents, does not represent the constituents. And it's obvious that the biggest fear in a totalitarian dictatorship, such as the one I live in, is uprising of the masses. And so now they're working to stop the masses from uprising, because the masses are finally figuring out that these people do not represent them whatsoever.
You mentioned the rabbis. I mean, one of the things that will stand out when the history of the last 40 days is written, and I suspect it will be writ large, is the enormous importance, salience even, of American Jews in the demand for a ceasefire, a demand for justice in Palestine, a breach with Netanyahu and his gang. This is all quite significant, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's game over for Zionism. I think the reality is, if you look at the international power brokers, the international finance people, Zionism is no longer of any value to them. Zionism is a problem to the people who run things, and they are doing what they need to do. I think, let me give you an example. If you look at Saudi Aramco, one of the most powerful corporations in the world, Amin Nasser is the CEO. I think it was July, he joined the board of directors of BlackRock. So they are annihilating, they are destroying Palestine. But at some point, Palestine needs to be rebuilt, doesn't it? Right now, Ukraine's being destroyed, but at some point it needs to be rebuilt. If you look at BlackRock, they are now set for the rebuilding of Ukraine. And I would suspect that when it's time to rebuild, I've said Palestine, when it's time to rebuild Gaza, you will see the Saudis, you will see BlackRock set to come in there also. So I suspect they're going to do away with the extremist leaders one way or another. The extremist Zionist leaders of Israel will be out of power, and they will make their move to make a difference, to change the Middle East so that Zionism doesn't dominate it. Zionism doesn't cause all the conflict. And then they can, as MBS said once before, they can turn the Middle East into the New York.
Yeah, I mean, they count on the fact that I don't want to put it too harshly, let's say the collaborating Arab rulers will forever be able to guarantee quietude on the part of their countries. But that flies in the face of all human development. I mean, if you take a country like Jordan, for example, where the majority of the population are themselves Palestinian, and where another 20% of the population are actually Iraqi, Saddam loyalists, family members, everything. You've got a mix in which it's exceedingly unlikely that forever the people of Jordan can be kept quiet, tame partners of Netanyahu. Ditto in Saudi Arabia. I've never been inside MBS's mind, but I'm pretty sure he's a smart guy. And that's why he's taking the kind of stands that he is taking, and he may have to take far more belligerent ones. So, from the point of view of these oligarchs that you speak of, they're going to have to move and move and move their position if their people are going to remain in power.
Well, I suspect, and I see MBS as a businessman and, quite frankly, a smart businessman. So if we get away from the morals of what's happening here, which certainly people like us are absolutely outraged over the death, and we consider the lives of the innocent and the average person. But if we start talking about international finance, we look at, I think, at the end of this, when they are able to bring this conflict to a close, I think they probably feel that if they're able to unseat the Netanyahu's, Smotrich's et al., they're able to bring in a more moderate wing of politics into Israel. They're able to do some type of a two-state solution or some kind of a resolution. They can then say to the Arab masses, we have finally resolved this. That can kind of quell the Arab masses, and then they can get to the part that is their real concern, which is as the international capital turns towards the global south, the global South, Africa, etc., they can kind of see the Middle East as the doorstep to that, the Middle East as a place where they can bring in labor, they can do all kinds of things through the Middle East. But I see the connections between BlackRock and the leadership of Saudi Arabia as a very important factor that we should keep an eye on. But I don't think this thing spreads like a lot of people do. I think ultimately what happens is they unseat the more radical wing of the Zionists in Israel and try to bring this thing to a close so they can move forward and make money, because that's what really the plan here.
Lastly, Garland, and I'm always grateful for your time, where sits the literati, the glitterati, the Hollywood chattering classes, the Me Too movement, feminists galore, and all of that? Where sit they on what's happening in Gaza? I mean, the champions of women's rights seem to have been quite quiet about the mass murder of thousands of women and even more children in the last 40 days. Where do the stars align in this conflict? Or are they too scared to stand up and be counted?
The sad place is they're waiting for directions from their masters. They're kind of being quiet. They see that there are certainly issues that could cause them, a large, let's face it, Hollywood's there to make money, though you wouldn't know it from the kind of movies that they're putting out these days. But they're waiting to be directed by their masters. What do we move? What do we do next? They don't want to offend too many people to stop themselves from selling tickets. So I think they're kind of sitting on their powder right now. They're now, for the most part, they're told to be quiet, wait till this thing blows over, and we'll get ourselves together. I mean, you can look at the recent Marvel's flop movie that's coming out. People have had it up to here with the woke, we're going to have all female superheroes that are diverse and all that kind of. People are tired of that. They just want a good movie with some aliens and some monsters and things of that nature, like a good old fashioned movie. And so I just think obviously, they seem to be laying low and waiting for the heat to blow over. That's what I would say Hollywood's doing.
Garland Nixon, simply a joy to be with you again. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
Li Jingjing, one of our most popular guests ever on the Mother of All Talk shows. You'll remember our last, I think, from our epic show that we did from Beijing, joins us now. I'm not sure from where, but I've no doubt you'll tell us, Li. The epic in San Francisco provided me with quite a few laughs and not a few jokes. But I know that for people like you, it was far more serious than that. How do you view the entire experience in San Francisco?
Thank you, George. Long time no see. Always such a pleasure to be on your show. Well, right now I'm at Los Angeles airport. I have been in California for like 8 or 9 days already. I was in San Francisco covering the APEC meeting and also our president and US president's meeting in the past few weeks. So I'm actually flying back to Beijing in 1 hour. So I've been observing the whole event, the whole meeting, and talking to people in America from all fields. And I think here are my takes. First, I think our President Xi, really brought a message of peace, a message of cooperation, and a message for win-win cooperation to the United States. I think this is probably one of the few good news that we have been hearing in recent months. And I'm sure many people believe this is one of the good news. Now that there are a will from both sides to stabilize the tensions, stabilize the relations. I know China has always been depicted as aggressive force and is considered a threat. But if one really looks into what China's leaders have been saying in multiple international occasions, the message has always been clear and consistent. China seeks peaceful development and win-win solution and not interested in being a hegemony. So, I mean, I'm not sure how many have read the quotes from our leaders. I think those quotes really shows a friendly message. For example, President Xi said to the United States when he was delivering a speech at the welcome dinner in San Francisco, he said, major competition cannot solve the problems facing China and the United States or even the world. The world is big enough to accommodate both countries, and one country's success is an opportunity for the other. And he also reassured to the United States, China does not have a plan to surpass or unseat the United States. Likewise, the United States should not scheme to surpass or contain China. And he really emphasized the message that as long as the two countries respect each other, coexist in peaceful and pursue win-win cooperation, they will be fully capable of rising about differences and find the right way for the two major countries to get along with each other. And disagreement should not be the gap that keeps two countries apart. Instead, the two countries should look for ways to build bridges to help them walk towards each other. So, I mean, if you really carefully look into the message from China's leadership, they want to have friendship, to find agreements with the United States to work together. And I want to, so far from my observation.
He was, just one more before you come back in. He was a very elegant suitor, a very impressive one. Xi Jinping is a very, very impressive man and leader, but it takes two to tango. What makes you think that Joe Biden, who couldn't contain himself in his characterization of China, of the president, of its leadership, for him, it's an Oriental dictatorship. What makes you think he's interested in dancing?
For that comments, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs already condemned that. But that little things should not stop. We see the bigger picture. So far, there are a lot of announcements on cooperation. And for example, both sides agree on cooperation in trees technology, in dealing with climate change, less economic war, less provocations on the Taiwan issue. These are the announcements. But if they really can be delivered, this will bring a new era to U.S.-China relations if both sides put their words into actions. But from my standpoint, I think it really depends on whether the U.S. can deliver, can put all these words into actions. For example, as we remember a year ago at the Bali meeting, both sides also reached a certain agreement, but the U.S. didn't follow it. But I'm having a little bit more confidence into this because right before this meeting, people from all fields from China and the U.S. have been laying the groundwork for this meeting with two leaders. I can draw a bigger picture for everybody else here. Before the two leaders met in San Francisco, there were already a lot of exchanges in different fields from the U.S. and China. For example, California governor visited China, multiple cities, visited different businesses. And actually, he was quite respectful when he was in China. One of the few American politicians that were actually being respectful when they were in China. And also, there were a lot of exchanges between academia and on people's level. Many scholars from the U.S. have been visiting China. Many scholars from China have been visiting the U.S. So there were already a lot of exchanges on different levels before this meeting happened. And this time, so that laid the groundwork for the two leaders to meet. Of course, and many people have been telling me, don't blindly trust them. Of course, I'm pretty sure China's leadership is smart enough to not blindly trust that. And I know we understand this is probably a U.S. tactical retreat because they got their hands full. But at least for now, it will bring us stability, and especially the stability and growth in Asia Pacific region. So this meeting, I think, is not just good for China and the U.S. It's good for entire Asia Pacific meeting. As many economic experts said, well, especially in leading this region, they don't want to choose sides between China and U.S. And it will be a tough decision because you cannot leave China's market and you cannot leave out China in any multinational organizations now. So countries in this region don't want conflicts. They want to see the both sides work together. And at the welcome meeting, regardless of what Joe Biden behaved, America's top 20 American business, including Apple, Tim Cook, Elon Musk, all these top 20 American business leaders attended this welcome dinner. And some people said probably even U.S. president will not be able to call all those important CEOs together. But this meeting between the two, President Xi was able to bring all these important business leaders together to sit down because they want to see a cooperation. And another thing I want to see is this is not just economic cooperation. I think I cannot agree more what President Xi said at this meeting is the friendship between China and the U.S. lies on the people and depends on the youth. So this time he brought a message that we want to boost people-to-people exchanges, which will determine the future, not just China-U.S. relations, probably China and the rest of the world's relationship. For example, this time more direct flights between China and U.S. will be resumed. More climate change exchange will be resumed. And also China invites 50,000 American students to visit China in the next 5 years, and more exchanges. And in the U.S., he also met with a group of longtime China friends. When I say China friends, they are the ones, for example, the Flying Tiger soldiers. They were the American soldiers who fight with the Chinese soldiers during World War II, defeat the imperialist Japanese soldiers. He also met with the family in Iowa, who was the first family that President Xi met with when he went to United States. And also the family members of the first U.S. correspondent in China, when China was going through revolution. Those people, they are American people that have been working towards the friendship between China and U.S. So he welcomed all those people to help them to play a role boosting the friendship between China and U.S. And this is important because, like, from my experience, I stayed in San Francisco and Los Angeles in the past 10 days. I went to multiple universities, UCLA, UC Berkeley, San Francisco State University, and I talked to American people from different fields. And it's shocking to me that when I ask them, what do you know about China, or what's the first thing pop ups in your mind when mentioning China, most of them don't know anything about China. Like, even you say food or kung fu or panda, I think that's enough. But basically, they have zero knowledge about China. And if there is something that pops up in their mind about China, it's always the negative things. Someone told me, oh, COVID. Someone said, well, competition. It's always the negative things. So that shows how the propaganda, the information war that launched by the U.S., the Western mainstream media, have been working to the populations here.
I saw you just tweeted about it in the last moments. The extraordinary decision, you can say extraordinary, I think a very important one, of the Arab delegation from the Joint Arab League, OIC, working group, seeking to bring about an end to the onslaught on Gaza. They're headed not to Washington, still less to London or Paris. They're headed to China. This is very significant. And how do you think they'll be received in China? What might happen?
I think this is a major step. And this was announced right after President flew back to China from the United States. So, I mean, look at the efforts to making progress, to making peace from China's leadership. First, stabilize the tensions between the U.S., stabilize the tensions in Asia Pacific. Now, they are stepping in to solve the crisis in the Middle East. And this is if this really works, this will change the world. I'm not worrying about whether China will be the world top leader. When I was in America in the past 2 days, I walked into multiple protests, events that showing support for Palestine. And this is the international will. And it's interesting. Only China has been seen as the trustworthy mediator for this conflicts. I just think that this is like interesting moment. I don't know what's gonna happen next because let's see. But I hope this will provide a solution to solve the crisis that has been so crushing to all of us, and provide a just settlement for Palestinians. And if this really happened, we probably can really bring peace to the world and truly achieve a win-win solution for all, not just for China and the US, really for all. And people, no matter whether you are in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Asia, we're probably gonna finally have the rights to develop the right that has been denied for centuries by Western imperial powers. So I hope this works. And let's all hope that we can walk into a new world order.
God willing. And I'm sure you've got many fine diplomats in the United States, but few can talk and look as good as you. Li Jingjing, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. On the line is a legend, Erobos in New York on Palestine. Erobos, welcome.
Salutations and greetings, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you, brother.
And as is my way, I need to uplift yourself, your beautiful family, the supporters, and your Patreons from around the world. Two very quick highlights, because time is always against us at this hour. I was concerned for your health for a period of 2 weeks, because I noticed you were, Mother Nature was trying to insist you take some time off, and I was concerned. And even though you have 5 scions and the magnificent Gayatri Galloway, there's still only one George Galloway, which segues into my second highlight of, you are potentially throwing your hat into the mayoralty of the old London town. You're just one person. This is surprising to me. We need leaders, and we know we need leaders, and it always seems to fall upon the hardened, worn shoulders of yourself and maybe Chris Williamson and the entire Anglosphere that I can see, people who are anti-establishment, traditional leftists. And, people think they're going to live stream their way out of this. They're going to retweet their way out of this. We have no leaders. We have people who are comfortable making a dollar and getting subscriptions. And we're not going to get anywhere like that. And the main point of why I called, it was important for me to say those two things because I've been holding it in for quite a few weeks. The main point is, I think based on your analysis and Scott Ritter and Brian Beletic and also Alex Christoforou there, Alexander, I come to the conclusion that unlike before, when the Arab world was disunified and fractured, for Israel, and it highlights a lot of what's been said already, for Israel, for them to permanently conquer the strip that they have cleared out, they're going to be sitting on a throne of thorns, strapped, and they're going to have explosives strapped to that throne. I don't think it's going back ever to how it was again, and it was already atrocious. I think them sitting there thinking they're going to dominate this area, the surrounding Arab countries are not going to have that. I mean, you have Houthi rebels from way in Yemen firing on them on a daily basis. This is only going to escalate based on historical precedent. We saw that with the Iraqi resistance. There are old letters of Osama bin Laden trending on TikTok now. There, in Afghanistan, all these different places. It takes a while for the resistance to coagulate and to come together, but it's going to happen. And this time, they're facing a unified populace of the Arab world. Even though, as Garland highlighted, on the rulership level, they want to do business as usual, but the populace, the Arab populace, the neighboring regions have been unified in a way that we have never seen. I mean, you'd have to go back to the Ottoman Empire, the guy from the movie, you know what I'm talking about, the one that
pre-Lawrence of Arabia,
Yes, to see that unity. So I just wanted to highlight this.
Yeah. Well, you did very powerfully, and I'm deeply grateful and moved by your kind remarks. I did have a cold for a couple of weeks, but I'm tip-top now, by the grace of God. As a matter of fact, I'm going for a brisk swim right after this show. So I'm grateful for what you said, but I also agree entirely with the analysis that you made. There's always a lot of talk in the media, in government circles, about the need to curb radicalization. The radicalization of our young people, the radicalization of Muslim people, the radicalization of other peoples of color, traditionally oppressed. How radicalizing do they think the last 40 days have been? If you were a young Muslim anywhere in the world, how radical are you feeling right now? How radical are you feeling about what's happening to your co-religionists being massacred like fish in a barrel with nowhere to escape? How radical do you feel about your own government and your own state endlessly supporting this massacre, this genocide? How radical do you feel about the American government, the British government, the French, the German government? I'd hazard a guess that you are boiling with radicalism, that you are boiling with radical rage. The idea that any of this makes anybody, anywhere, in the entire world safer than they were 40 days ago is so insane. You really wonder how apparently sane people can believe it. Last call, Hashem in New Jersey. He's got a solution. Let's hear it.
Hi,
Go ahead,
George.
Hashim.
Yeah, Hisham, how are you? I think
Hisham,
I have sort of a solution for that. I'm an American Egyptian, but last night, I saw, I replayed that twice, and I saw it first time about 2 or 3 years ago. And I don't know if you know the good man or not, but it is Robert Dixon Crane. He was the advisor on the National Security Council for President Nixon. I attended keynote speaking by I attended Dr. Crane's. He's first a lawyer, a Harvard-trained lawyer. He started the international law, Harvard University program. Yesterday, that program on YouTube, I think everybody who speaks English and is interested in the Palestinian issue should watch that program. I don't know if you know the man. His talk that I saw yesterday twice after 4 or 5 years is about compassionate justice. He's very well written about, first he's a Muslim, and his speech was in the Rumi luncheon about 12 years ago. And in that speech of 1 hour, 20 minutes, he addressed the issue of Islamic, terrorism. He called them extremist, and he used actually an Arabic term. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he was trying to explain about how to combat terrorism. But in that talk, which should be listened to everybody on the planet who speaks English, and it can be translated. He has also mentioned that he was the advisor of Ahmed Yusuf, one of the leaders of Hamas. One of 2 leaders started Hamas. He was advisor to President Nixon, and I don't know if Ahmed Yusuf is killed. I don't know who he is, but he was talking about compassionate justice, and he didn't specifically address, and he said in that talk yesterday that he doesn't address the issue of Palestine because it's complicated, but the issue is justice is absent from our world. And I saw in the beginning of the show today that you were talking to a Chinese lady, and you mentioned something about the Arab League or something going to China. The solution of this Palestinian problem, number one, is Britain, England, China, France, and the other one would be Russia, giving out veto power in the United Nations. Second, if they didn't do that, the Arab world, or the shameful, attitude of Muslim world now and the Arab League, they should, along with all the countries that, cut relations with Israel, withdraw from the United Nations and go and have a new United Nations in South Africa or something, in Cape Town, and that would be the beginning of the solution. The third point of that is one country, it is called Palestine, not Israel, because current Israel is 2 things. Was stolen by the people of Israel for a land with no people, for a people with no land, which is a big lie. Everybody knows about that. The second issue, the name Israel is the name of a decent and great prophet we believe in, Prophet Jacob, and they stole that name. That country has nothing to do with Israel. Third, next is the amount of patients, the Palestinian, 11,000, 15,000 killed, 5,500 children killed. These people are following up in the footsteps of the prophet Israel, Jacob. In chapter 12 of the Quran, he mentions good patient. He mentions beautiful patient. And I'm sorry, I'm going to use a term, it's bad, but you can say, I'm goddamn patient. Beautiful patient is the patient that the Prophet Muhammad, recommended, that when you're hit with calamity, you say what the Palestinians say in Arabic, and I know you know some Arabic, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We belong to God, and to whom we return. We're all slaves of
Well,
God.
look, Hisham, we've run out of time. Much as I found what you had to say very interesting, we'll have to draw it to a conclusion. We didn't quite get to your solution, but I'm sure we'll check out what Mr. Crane had to say. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back again on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK. That's Wednesday at 9 p.m. UK time. And bring another viewer with you, because we're just under 3 million views in the last 7 days. I'm determined to stay above it. Thanks very much.